So it's September 1st, 2020, and this is the Special Fathers Network Dad Zoom call on adaptive athletics. And I'm thrilled tonight to be hosting this call along with two of our early dads, what I would say as some of our initial dads that signed on to do podcast interviews. Number 4, Jim Elliot, and number 7, Clayton Frech. And what I'd like to do is have each of you make very brief introductions from a personal perspective, and then I'll come back to each of you, and you can tell us about your various adaptive sports programs, and then we'll go into Q&A afterwards. So in my opening remarks, I'd like to point out that Clayton, when I met him about 2 years ago, was very cordial and schooled me a little bit about adaptive athletics. So I got really inspired by the work that he's doing with Angel City Sports. And I asked him very innocently, I said, with the robust programs that Special Olympics has, not only in Northern California, but Southern California, why would you set up a program to compete with Special Olympics? And he said very gently, he said, well, you know that Special Olympics is for people with intellectual disabilities, and what we're talking about is adaptive athletics, think Paralympics. And honestly, I had no conception that Special Olympics was for people with just intellectual disabilities. So Clayton, I just want to say thank you for helping me, enlighten me about that. I'd like to think that I'm probably not the last person on the planet to have that enlightenment. So why don't we go to Jim first. Jim Elliot with diveheart.org.
David and I met through Rotary. I'm a Rotarian, and David met Jody, one of our volunteer instructors, and we came together. And the next thing I know, we're on a dive trip in Cozumel with his daughter, and he's sticking a microphone in my face saying, "Tell me more about what you did. It's a cool story." And I'm like, "Okay, I will." But basically, my dad was a disabled veteran, so I've been around people with disabilities since I was a kid. I was dodging wheelchairs at Hines VA Hospital. My oldest daughter was born blind. She struggled with that. When I was at WGN Radio, we got her involved with downhill skiing. It turned her life around. And I've been diving since college in the 70s, and I thought, wow, if skiing can do this, I wonder what diving can do, because you can only ski at certain times of the year in certain places in the world. But there's a pool in every community. So I'm thinking, I was a Lion at the time, right? I got involved with the Lions because my daughter's blind and they serve people with visual disabilities. And so, I started brainstorming it. And, from the mid 80s, eventually in 2004, it took me a while to start a nonprofit called Diveheart, which serves physical and cognitive individuals, children, veterans, and adults with disabilities, everything from PTSD and traumatic brain injuries in veterans to, cerebral palsy and spina bifida and autism. We have a ton of kids with autism. So that's kind of how I got into it. And now, 2001, almost 20 years later, it turned into something way bigger than I thought it would. And, we're hoping to build a deep warm water pool in Lake County, believe it or not, to replicate the benefits we see in scuba therapy.
Jim, thanks again for that brief self-introduction. Clayton, over to you.
Sure, I'll try to keep it tight. So just my sort of personal story is we have 3 amazing boys that are 15, 11, and 8. We don't make girls for some reason, and they all look very similar. That's a good sign, I guess. But my eldest was the one that essentially ushered me into this world, and he was born with some limb differences. Without his left knee and left fibula, which is the shin bone. And then he only had one kind of big finger on his left hand at birth. And so, went through a lot of emotions that early days in the hospital and even after that, just sort of processing what this meant. And the good thing was, in our case, is that everything else was healthy. It was just a orthopedic impairment or difference, and we had a medical roadmap before we left the hospital. We got really good advice from an orthopedic surgeon who came by, and we got the diagnosis for what had happened. It was just a new genetic event where the gene that controls the large limb bones got some bad directions and affected his left side. So while we weren't out of the woods emotionally, we had some pretty good data points exiting the hospital. And I think we'll talk about it more later, but my son happened to really love sport. And that was a nice, it was sort of a nice alignment with me, because I've always been active. And I've thought more about this probably since I did the original number 7 podcast with you guys. But I think that being a father to me, especially a first-time father, meant being physically active with my children. And so that really was I think that was a real big driver for me in, getting Angel City started and really just sort of trying to figure out his life. I think that was a really big piece of it, is that that's sort of how I identified, being a father, or at least an important part of being a father. So that's me.
Clayton, thanks for the introduction. I'd like you just to go a little bit deeper, because I think that there's an interesting story. And I know that people can listen to your podcast for the more full story. But when Ezra, your oldest, was born, like you said, you had a roadmap before you left the hospital. But there were some remarkable stepping stones. And I think it'd be worth just spending a minute sharing with our audience what that experience was about from the beginning, and when he was 4 or 5, doing some public speaking, and some of the highlights.
Yeah, I would say I feel really blessed that we had some just good advice along the way. So I think we were probably doing some things right to build the confidence and the character along the way. But as you said, there were some pretty interesting milestones. So he had a little left foot and a little left leg. It just was curved in. It wasn't going to ever bear weight. So we knew we had to remove that leg, the lower leg, and we knew we were going to try to salvage a part of the foot to help rebuild the hand. And so that's what we did. And he was not quite 3, he was like 2.5, going on 3 when we did the surgery to remove that lower leg. And we took the big toe and put it on his hand. So he was born with 1 finger, and we added the thumb to give him opposition. And even just that, that was a 15-hour surgery under microscope. We had canceled a surgery the night before because the doctor had just the wrong approach, and we couldn't. Just took us a long time to sort of get sort of validation from other docs, because they didn't want to speak out against this one guy. So we had a lot of drama getting to that point. And we did do a follow-up surgery when he was in kindergarten to try to free the hand up a little more, and it didn't work too well. But so, we've been to Boston Children's twice for surgeries. He's been on a prosthetic since he was 11 months old. And this is a really interesting milestone that is like incredible to think about. So he was pulling himself up to tables and, on 1 leg. And we put this little itsy bitsy prosthetic on him at 11 months old. And he looked at us like, where the hell's this been? And he starts walking around this table like that. Like, it was most miraculous, incredible thing I think I've ever seen. And then when he was 4, we changed prosthetic providers and we put a knee on him. So he's had a knee from really early days. And then a few months later, he got a running blade. So he's been on a running blade now for, 11 plus years. And so, yeah, so those were some of the big kind of like medical milestones that were I could probably write a book about certainly about canceling a surgery the night before. It's just like, it's so stressful.
Thanks for sharing, Clayton. I appreciate it. So what I'd like each of you to do now is to go into sort of the beginning of, in your case, Jim, how did Dive Heart start? And then Clayton, in your case, how did Angel City come about? What was the original vision? And how have things transpired? And maybe give an example or two of, you know, what you've done or the impact you've had in people's lives.
Sure.
Jim, back to you.
Thank you. Can everyone hear me okay? All right, great. You know, like I said, I've been working with people with disabilities a long time, and in the 80s, I got involved in downhill skiing with my daughter to help when she didn't want to be blind and she threw down her cane and refused to learn Braille. I was like, what am I going to do with this kid? And luckily, if you've been in Chicagoland a while, a guy named Floyd Brown, who was an announcer for WGN Radio, turned me on to a guy named Sammy Scoble, who was involved with the American Blind Skiing Foundation. And so I started guiding and teaching blind skiers. My daughter started skiing. And I did that up until like 2013, I think was the last year I actually did an event with them. And like I said, all the time thinking, wow, we could do this in pools a lot easier than we could do this going out to a ski hill and all that stuff. So I just, thought I would do that at some point in my life, and walked away from the media business, most recently at CLTV News here in Chicagoland, which is no longer around, and decided to do a 501c3 and reach out to some friends that were attorneys, and they did stuff pro bono for us. And next thing I knew, we were off to the races. The minute they said, Jim, you're a 501c3, you could start raising money, I said, oh, good. That's how I raised 4 kids, you know what I mean, in the media business, in the advertising side and marketing side. So I went out and just started, and I thought we were always going to be a small club type of thing. I thought we do a couple we do pool programs regularly, and we do some, maybe go to the quarry during the summer, and then in once or twice a year we would go out to an open water dive, maybe in Florida or something. And this year, because of COVID, we canceled 11 trips, and 6 of them were out of the country. We canceled all of our programs from LA to Tampa to West Palm, affecting a lot of lives, obviously. And we didn't want to risk their health, basically. That was kind of it. We've decided we focused on redoing our website and all that kind of stuff, and database, and updating our training program. And, and hopefully 2021 will be, a better year for us. But, I kind of left the media business and started Dive Heart, thinking it was going to be a small thing, and had no idea that we'd be doing research with university medical centers around the country. No idea that we would be a training program certifying, just like PADI, right? You're PADI, right, David? Yeah. I mean, PADI is the number one in America, at least, the number one scuba training agency. And they kind of went to school on Dive Heart. People we trained went to corporate PADI and gave them all of our stuff, and basically said, you need to be doing adaptive scuba. And so they're doing that. So we're doing research with university medical centers, which has been awesome. And that's why we want to build a deep warm water facility here in the Chicagoland area to replicate what we see in open water. And then the training part has taken off. And even though we've canceled and moved all of our programs to 2021, some of our instructors around the world are still doing stuff. I mean, in Georgia, we have instructor trainers that are doing training, and in Malaysia and Borneo and places like that. They're just doing things, all the time. Besides the facility and the research and the training, we do outreach and education. We like to inspire people, basically. So we know we can't do it all. We don't want to try to do it all. I mean, Angel City Sports can't do it all. You're focused on your market. We're doing what we can around the country and around the world, but we want people to be able to take our research and our training materials and all the things we've done and go, wow, you know what? I can do this in Bora Bora. I don't necessarily need to have, I don't need to go do diving with Dive Heart. I can read the materials and do the online training, which was created by the same people that did Patty and Dan training materials. So, that's kind of what we're doing, is trying to inspire right now, do outreach and education. Collaboration and partnership is really important. Angel City Sports works with us now in the LA area, and along with some other organizations. But it's, just moving forward. In times like this, where we're all challenged, poor companies fail and good companies survive, and great companies thrive and go forward and do amazing things. And we're hoping to be one of those great companies.
Well, Jim, I'd like you to be a little bit more granular as far as what you do in training instructors, senior instructors, and the type of athletes that you work with or individuals that you work with. So a listener who wouldn't have had any understanding about scuba diving for people with special needs or people with disability, how does that work?
Yeah, fair enough. I've taken notes in working with people with disabilities since my father all the way through my children. And what I've done is put together a training program, taking the little bit that was out there in the world and, creating an empathy training program where people we try to get them to understand what it's like to be a blind diver, a paraplegic, a quadriplegic diver, an amputee diver. And, you're able-bodied, and imagine going through this program where you're a diver and you're a competent diver, but we tie your legs together and we take your fins away, or we take one of your arms and we make you hold it, tuck it up under your buoyancy compensator and remove and replace your kit. Or we take your mask and we fill it with something that blinds you. So now everything is tactile. So the empathy part is really important so that people understand it. But that can't be all of it. It has to be experiential. So the training program that we created, that David was on, saw firsthand that we try to get instructors and dive buddies who are going through our training to have hands-on experience. We found that just doing the empathy part doesn't build the confidence that instructors need and buddies need to work with people with disabilities. So we created these trips. That's why we were going to do 11 trips this year, because every trip has X number of adaptive divers. We don't call them handicapped. We don't call them disabled. We call them adaptive divers. So our adaptive divers, we know we can put 6 on a boat. We know we need 2 to 3 buddies per diver. We know we can put 20 to 30 people on a boat based on that and their abilities and everything. So we configure a trip like that. And sometimes we have 20 to 30 people, and sometimes we have up to 50 people. And we have more than one boat. And we go out and we have breakfast, lunch, and dinner with individuals with disabilities. And these new training buddies and instructors also, go on the boat and do morning dives with them. And then in the afternoon, we kind of beat them up doing training like David went through. And we beat them up and we make them go through all the empathy training. And then they go to breakfast the next day with somebody and go, wow, you're blind. I just did the blind training last night with Jim until dusk. And oh my God, I had no idea that you tell me more about what you do. And what it does is it gives the able-bodied instructors and buddies an opportunity to, over a week's time, to learn not just the empathy training and not just the experience of diving with people with disabilities, but that all the nuance that's involved in somebody with a disability and what they have to go through. And I tell you what, at the end of the week, these are new divers. I don't care how experienced they think they are. And they're ready to go out potentially and with our help start programs in their communities. And that's basically what our goal is to replicate this around the world. Did that help?
Excellent, Jim. Thank you. Clayton, let's talk about Angel City Sports, what your original vision was, how it transpired, and what it's doing today.
Sure. So as I mentioned earlier, the alignment of a son who was always a sports kid and a father who thought that's what being a dad was pretty good, pretty magical. And just to give you some fun little nuggets, so Ezra, when he got his first ball at about 6 months, I realized, okay, there's all these like toys around. There's no ball. Where's just a regular old ball? You would have thought he won the lottery as a 6-month-old. I mean, he could sort of sit up and he saw this ball and his eyes lit up, and literally we just passed the ball back and forth for hours on end. He learned to count by twos watching Laker games before he knew how to count by ones. He's been designing his own workouts in the backyard since he was like 2 years old. Like just crazy sport kid. And so he's been on a running blade since he was 4, and basketball was really his probably number one passion growing up. He played a lot of just rec, and then eventually made a club team and did really well on a club team. And at one point his coach said he thinks he can play in college, which is incredible. I mean, to do that on a running blade as an above knee amputee, so huge difference between an above knee and a below knee amputee in terms of abilities, speed, everything. And he's basically playing on one leg, if you can imagine. The blade is just there to sort of help prop him up a little bit of balance, but it's really not very helpful in the sport of basketball. But he also mainstreamed in other sports. I mean, he played soccer. He was a great flag football quarterback. I mean, an incredible high IQ quarterback, little baseball, just one of the guys. And he was so focused on basketball. Like that was like, he told the Golden State Warriors in a motivational speech the year that they beat the Bulls record, the regular season record, and then they lost in the finals. So the speech didn't work, I guess. But he told him that year that his dream was to play in the NBA, to be the first amputee to play basketball in the NBA. So that's, that starts to make me feel a little claustrophobic, when a kid's got these incredible dreams. And I just wanted him to have other dreams as well, and know that didn't have to be the only thing in his radar. And so I took him to his first Paralympic competition when he was 8 years old, the Endeavor Games in Oklahoma. And it's a multi-sport event. There's usually, their pool is closed, so they had a few sports that they weren't offering that year, but usually like 8 to 10 sports. And we had a blast. I mean, the kids set a bunch of national records on the track, and we played sitting volleyball and table tennis and did archery. Like, we just had an amazing weekend, and we were already really familiar with Paralympians. I mean, we knew a lot of people in the community. We were really more connected to the Challenged Athletes Foundation, which is another incredible organization that I'm sure funds, certain athletes to even go on Jim's trips and, pursue the sport of scuba. And so we were pretty connected, but not at this level. And we met just tons more Paralympians and just saw the power of learning and competing together. And so it was on the track that Sunday afternoon, tornado alley, tornado season, hot, muggy. I asked the question, well, why do you have to come to Oklahoma to do this? Why isn't this available in Los Angeles? And, you got to be careful what you say because it can become a commitment at times. But I really felt like it was like a lightning bolt hit me. It was like, bam, like, how did you not know this is why you're here? This is one of your reasons to exist on this planet. Because I looked at what they did, and I had a background in event planning, operations, and I'm like, this doesn't seem that hard to do. Of course, starting a nonprofit is a whole other story, but running an event seemed like a piece of cake. So I literally that day on the track, I started building the team. I mean, a couple of the officials were from California. They're like, I don't know why, I will help you, So I got officials and chased one of them down in the airport in Oklahoma City on the way out later that day. Just started to try to learn about this space. And build kind of a team and sort of a coalition of support. And it took us 2 years to get the first Angel City games off the ground. So we were at the Endeavor Games in 2013. The first games we hosted in 2015. And it's interesting because at the time I did have a pretty good vision for what the organization could evolve into. I just didn't know how fast, and I didn't know like how to do it all, but I just I did have a vision for really solving 3 problems that are all kind of interconnected. And that's kind of what we do today. But the vision was really to solve the lack of competitive opportunities by creating this multi-sport event, multi-sport competition, which is our Angel City Games presented by the Hartford. And that's kind of our flagship, but also solve the sort of the access to sort of basic training and development as an athlete. And so, where's that sort of entry point, and how do we kind of expand that? And so we do that through clinics that we offer year round. We were going to do, Jim mentioned how many trips he had canceled. We were going to do upwards of 100 clinics this year on the weekend clinics. So every weekend there was going to be, multiple things people could do. And then the third piece of it for our space for adaptive and Paralympic sports is equipment. So you can't, and it's same for Jim, I'm sure, you can't even have this conversation without starting to crack the equipment challenge. You've got to have equipment for people to try these sports. So we've been building our inventory of adaptive sports equipment over the years. So we have close to 100 pieces of equipment now that we loan to athletes, we'll loan to other programs, and we use it in our own programs. And so, where we are today, we serve kids, adults, and veterans. So essentially the same sort of cross section as Dive Heart. We are more focused on physical disabilities because Special Olympics is big and they're everywhere. They're serving 20,000 people in Southern California alone. So we don't need to go there, and they are very different sports, very different coaching, everything's different. So we don't need to go there. We're more focused on the physical disability side. And I would say we cover adaptive and Paralympic sports. And so just to like kind of give a quick definition. So an adaptive sport, as we define it, is just a sport that's been altered through rule change or equipment for a person with a physical disability. And the Paralympics, similar to the Olympics, are just a subset of those sports that are contested at the highest level right after the Olympics. 2 weeks after the Olympics, they host the Paralympic Games. So obviously Tokyo 2020 was pushed back till next summer. All have our fingers crossed that the Tokyo Games will happen again and like be all good. So that's kind of what we do. And I think, Jim, you touched on it a little bit. I'm just like that, kind of the community that forms when you're on one of your trips. And we see the same thing. I think, honestly, I tell our donors, like, we're not really about sport. It's about living a healthy, active life, optimizing your life. But at the end of the day, probably the most important thing to me and my team is creating a sense of belonging, creating a home base and creating a community where kind of doesn't matter who you are. You could walk up with no arms, one arm, no legs, paralyzed, blind, whatever. We're going to accept you and love you for exactly who you are, and you belong with us. You might not always feel like you belong out there in society, and any of the special fathers out there know that. It's a tough world out there for our kids. And so that belonging is by far the most important thing that we're going for, which is why I still try to attend all of our events, because I can't imagine someone showing up and not making sure they felt really special for just showing up. And so that's kind of my job, is like, to go say hi to as many people as I can at our events. There's a day where I won't be able to get to everything, but I'm still trying. And you asked David a little bit about the future, and so I'll paint a little bit of a vision for kind of some things that we'd like to look at. First of all, if you look at the country, and Jim probably knows this from a scuba access and even just general water sports access, there's huge dark zones in the country where there's very little access to these sports and recreational activities. So, we're going to sort of look at geographic expansion where we can add value to a region and kind of bring a little muscle into areas of the country that don't have much. We're also looking at training. There's a lot to be done around training volunteers how to interact with people with disabilities, as well as training coaches. So the movement really can't grow without coaches. Our games, which Jim's been to a couple times, I think my goal is to make it the largest sporting event in the world that has all summer Paralympic sports. But I don't care how old you are, and I don't care if you've ever done these sports. You just have to have a physical disability and show up. And you get to sort of have your, kind of our own version of the Paralympic Games. So just a really aggressive goal there. But again, I don't care if you're good. I don't have a qualifying criteria. And we take care of the little ones. We take care of elderly, everybody in between. Kind of don't care what your demographics are. And lastly, the pandemic has really sparked us to think deeper about our role across the country and certainly around the world. And so, we're looking at what are ways that we can use technology to bring the community together and offer value virtually to people around the world. And so I don't know exactly what that means. We've built an app that over time will be downloadable and have content on it and partners like David Hirsch. So we have, maybe that's the beginning of something there, but there's people around the world that can't make it to our physical programming. And so how do we serve and support them and make them feel like they belong and are part of this really pretty amazing community?
Clayton, thanks for sharing. I just want to make sure our listeners have a very good idea about what the Angel City Sports Organization and then the Angel City Games that you put on. So they started in 2015. You were able to put them on for 5 years. 2020 is a dark year for so many different reasons. How many different sports do you guys offer? How many athletes are there? How many volunteers do you need to put on the scope of scale, the events that you're putting on?
Yeah, so I'll break it down. I'll just talk about the games first. So it's our flagship event. It's the main thing we do all year. Last year and this year, we had over 400 athletes participate. This year we were virtual. We have been adding sports every year. So this year we went up to 9 Paralympic sports. And our goal is to get up to 22 summer Paralympic sports by 2028 when LA hosts the Paralympic Games. We typically need, if we had the games this year, we were going to need 600 to 700 volunteers over the course of like 5 days. So it's a pretty massive undertaking. We don't need that many volunteers the rest of the year, but we probably have a couple hundred, that are pretty regular. The rest of the year, we did I think we did like about 21 or 22 sports last year. So we're doing a number of recreational sports. We did skateboarding, we've done kayaking, we've done a couple diving clinics with David Hirsch. And so we're really, we think that those recreational sports are actually an even better starting point for newer athletes because it doesn't feel as threatening and competitive, and you don't have to characterize yourself as an athlete to go scuba diving or kayaking. And so it's less intimidating than maybe track or swimming or cycling or something. But yeah, I think over time we'll be in all the summer Paralympic sports and then, be in another 15 to 20 recreational sports. So I think kind of the vision would be, we're close, we're pushing 35, 40 sports throughout the year. Because also the community needs this access. They need a place to try these things out. I can't build programs unless I find people that are interested in doing things ongoing. And so having a real diverse slate of clinics where people can get that introduction to sport, I think is super important. And maybe more important than having ongoing programming, because people will figure out how to get the ongoing programming if they're inspired. but how do I get them inspired?
Thanks for sharing again, Clayton. And before we go back to Jim, you made reference to the 2028 Olympics a couple of times, and I'm going to steal a page out of the 2012 London Games. And I remember seeing billboards, not because I was there, but just afterwards, that said that the 2012 Olympics were the warm-up games for the Paralympics. So from that perspective, I'm hoping that the 2028 Olympics are the warm-up event for the 2028 Paralympics.
I love that. Yes.
Okay, Jim, back to you. I had a question, sort of similar to the one that I asked Clayton. How many athletes do you have go through your programs on an annual basis? How many volunteers support those programs? And I want you to talk a little bit about the diversity in athletes that you've been able to accommodate with scuba diving, because most people are thinking, like, how in the world could you take somebody with special needs or disability scuba diving? And you've got some pretty extreme situations. So back to you, Jim.
Yeah, we do. You've seen them firsthand. But working with Angel City Sports and collaborating with organizations like that help bring people of all abilities to Dive Heart. And we originally, I just thought we were going to be working with people in wheelchairs. One of the greatest thrills for me is to get somebody out of a wheelchair to stand up, and the first time they look down, whether it's post-injury or whether they've never stood up in their life because they were born with cerebral palsy, and they look down and go, oh my God, I'm standing up. That's like a huge thrill for me. So we've taken that, and then, who knew that we'd be working with people with autism and doing the first research on autism and scuba therapy with Midwestern University. And I had no idea that we'd be doing stuff with Johns Hopkins and finding out that there's an extra output of serotonin in the human body, which helps with pain management and also with PTSD symptoms. So we're really on the tip of the iceberg there. But I think by just working with people like Clayton and collaborating and going to dive shows, we have my strategy is twofold, kind of. It's kind of like I got a ground game and a long game, right? And the ground game is this. This is the ground game. I'm talking to David. I'm talking to Clayton. I'm talking to you guys. I'm presenting to Rotary clubs. I'm at the chamber meetings. I'm wherever I need to be. I'm Zooming with the dive club in New York. That's the ground game. That's the hard work. Sunday, every Saturday, now that we're not traveling, we do outreach and education programs at a farmer's market. We just move upstairs, set up a bunch of tables, and hundreds of people come by. We're in a very high traffic area in our city in downtown Downers Grove, and we encourage our folks around the world to do that, the same thing. The long game, that's the ground game, the hard work, lifting, schlepping tanks, all that kind of stuff. The long game is what I've done for decades, and that's media. It's taking the NBC Nightly News with Brian Williams and repurposing that over and over again, and taking the PBS documentary that was done by the folks at Turning Point and CNN and all these. This one deals with pain. This one deals with autism. This one deals with traumatic brain injuries. And to take those pieces and to do the long ball, it's like, boom, I'm going to throw this. This is Autism Month. I'm going to do an autism post. And you just you never know what's going to happen. One of our largest individual donors from Southern California saw a Turning Point documentary, which is one of the best pieces we've ever had done, and called me the next day and said, my husband and I were crying last night after we saw Turning Point. Where do we send a check? And that was year 1. And they sent $10,000. And this is year 5, and they sent $50,000. Now, for some organizations, that's not a lot of money, but for us, that's a significant donation. And so we, if we can multiply that over and over and over again, we would love to do that. But to answer your question, we have programs in Malaysia, Borneo. I've trained in hundreds of cities around the U.S., all over the world, Israel, China, Australia, the UK. So we've planted seeds everywhere. It's like Johnny Appleseed, right? We we're doing this here. And you can inspire people, like Clayton said, but you can't force people to do things, and you can't do it all yourself. So what we're trying to do is a combination of inspiring and doing and motivate. You know what I mean? So it's a little bit of everything. I hope that answers your question. But
it does, at least partially. Thank you, Jim. So how many divers, adaptive athlete divers, would you come in contact with on, say, an annual basis? And then I'd like you to talk about the two that come to mind, which I thought were very extreme, because we're not just talking about missing a limb or being a paraplegic, quadriplegic, or blind person. I mean, that's pretty extreme, don't get me wrong.
yeah.
But I remember learning about a woman who's a quadra amputee, and then I haven't seen this, but I remember stories being told about somebody who's on a ventilator going scuba diving.
Right. So we've done a couple. We've experimented with different books of business. For a while, we thought we would do Dive Heart, not chapters, because that's a legal entity. So we made teams, and a team would be a place where we insured the instructors and brought in materials and gave them everything they needed to get started, and worked with them, helped insure the pools that they use. So we probably have in the US right now, maybe 6 or 7 of those. We've downsized because they're kind of like having children. You know what I mean? Every time you start a new team, you've got new people calling your office going, hey, I need this, I need that. What do I do here? What do I do there? And to be honest with you, we're very bare bones. I mean, I don't draw a salary. I have 6 or 7 part-timers in different parts of the country that help us get, office administration done, training done, because we're not trying to do it all. Now, we have hundreds and hundreds of instructors around the world that I've trained. Maybe over 1,000, I think, because I've been training since 1997. And those instructors, I believe, have worked with thousands and thousands of individuals with disabilities around the world. I mean, I could show you pictures where it looks like there's 100 people in a photograph with Saeed, our lead in Malaysia. And that's happening like all the time. So, I mean, if he does 10 of those in a month, is that 100 extra people, you know what I mean, or 1,000 extra people? You've got things like that going on. So I don't know if that addresses how many people we reach, but we do things internationally, and the industry, we've moved the industry, which is really exciting, because PADI, the #1 training agency in the country, if not the world, took our materials and used them to help develop a Cliff Notes version of an adaptive scuba program. And that is a huge compliment to us. I mean, when they went into a big DEMA International Dive Show and had 4 photographs up on this big thing, and had 1,000 people in the room or more, 3 of the 4 photographs had people that Dive Heart trained. So we like to be influencers and bless you, move the industry forward that way. But there's so many aspects of it, and it's always changing. You have to be dynamic. You have to bump and run. You have to be able to, take advantage of opportunities like COVID-19 and make it work for you instead of holding you back. So, does that answer your question?
Yes, but you did not make reference to the
2 people you talked about.
or the ventilator. Thank you.
Right. We work with quads all the time. I'm not quite, for some reason, remembering exactly who the quad is, but I can tell you the only ventilator-dependent diver in the world was, we initially started training Matt Johnson, who's in Minneapolis. He has muscular dystrophy at 11. It took him over. He's much older now, thank God, to the amazing caregiving support of his father, who has to turn him like every 45 minutes at night. And Matt he fell in love with diving somehow in his youth, and said, I want to dive, and beat up everybody in the dive industry, and kept bothering us. I go, we're going to teach you. Stop calling me, right? And we basically taught him remotely for a long time. Then identified an instructor in Minneapolis that came down to Chicago to do the book work, and then came down to do the class and pool, and came down to do the open water. Unfortunately, that same instructor went back to Minneapolis and did a tech diving thing with rebreathers and really high speed stuff. And there was a bad O2 sensor, and he died the following weekend right after he finished our training. But we subsequently identified other instructors with Scuba Diving International that worked with Matt Johnson. And Matt has a dry suit which stops water at the neck, stops water at the wrist, and the feet are enclosed. And he wears a full face mask with communication, so water doesn't get in his airway at all. Then we adapted a special hose from his ventilator that went into a custom port on his dry suit. And then on the inside of the dry suit, the hose went up to his trach. And then we would communicate with him via eye blinks. So Matt was able to go down maybe 10 feet as far as his ventilator hose would go. But it was revolutionary. It was unbelievable. And for several years subsequent to that, we were working in LA actually with, you might maybe know him, Lenny Larson. Do you know Lenny Larson? Clayton? No. He's he at the Rose Bowl Aquatic Center, he teaches springboard diving, right? And he was a springboard diver, champion springboard diver, and did a wrong flip on a trampoline, got a C3 spinal cord injury, incomplete quad, but he's on a ventilator. And our goal with Northwestern University and Shirley Ryan Ability Lab here in Chicago, David, as you know, is to take Lenny and be able to take like 2 ventilators, put them in an underwater camera housing, and then connect that to him and take an appropriately trained team and medical staff and take him diving to 100 feet if he wants to go to 100 feet. And that's our goal. And we've worked on it for years with engineering students and medical staff at Northwestern. We haven't quite got the right formula of how is your ventilator going to, react underwater, and what is your lung capacity going to do when you're at 100 feet. So we're working through that still, but we're doing it kind of on the cheap with engineering students and people and volunteers and if we had somebody who had the right pocketbook, we probably could get it done right away. But it's going to make big news when we do it eventually, because it's going to be a lot of fun, and it's going to be, a journey that Lenny's been taking that he wants to finish as a diver. He's a dive master from prior to injury. So he's a diver. He understands the concepts of what we're doing.
Thanks for sharing, Jim. Oh, yeah, thank you. So one other question, Jim, and then I'll go back to you, Clayton. You talked, or at least made passing reference to this deep water pool, which is a big, hairy, audacious goal. And I'm wondering if you could just give us a brief overview of what your vision is for that.
Yeah, I can't tell you where it's going to be, but we've been promised 10 acres in Lake County. And basically what we want to do is replicate what we've seen in open water. And I could show you video, or you could go to diveheart.org and click on media and watch recent media and all sorts of videos. But the thrill for me, again, is getting people standing up underwater. And in Cozumel, where you've been, David, we can get people with current moving them through the water, and they could run across the bottom of the ocean on a sandy flat. They could use what abilities they have on a coral reef wall and be able to turn around and see and move independently. And we want to replicate a lot of that. We want to replicate what Hopkins found with the serotonin kick, which helps with pain management and PTSD symptoms. We believe that that rehabilitation can be revolutionized, and that there's decades of medical research that can be done in zero gravity, because right now no one's doing it. I mean, yeah, you have aquatherapy, you're floating somebody who's a quad at the surface, and yeah, it feels good and stuff. But what happens when we go under pressure and pressure doubles at 33 feet or 66 feet or 99 feet or 130 feet? What happens when we give people 50% O2 or 100% O2 at safe depths and have them now do range of motion activities and do other things? And then to take it one step further, what if organizations like Abbott or pharmaceutical companies get involved? And now at 50% O2, we're taking somebody at 15 or 20 feet and we're doing all these exercises, but now we're introducing a pharmaceutical product that normally does this at 1 atmosphere at the surface, which we're all at right now. But what will it do at 2 atmospheres or 3 atmospheres? So it's just really exciting to think about Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and all the different disabilities and conditions that we have to suffer as human beings, and be able to do research on all of those in a zero gravity environment and see what this hyperbaric pressure helps us accomplish, and this freedom really of range of motion and extra circulation, extravascular activity, and it benefits your GI and your GU. And I mean, these are medical people that have told me this. I'm not a doctor or a therapist, but it's really exciting. So we're hoping this facility will allow us to do that. And, once we get the land grant done, we were supposed to have it done already, but COVID kind of threw a monkey wrench in it. It was supposed to be done in spring, but we're hoping it gets done this year. And when it does, we'll be able to hit the ground running and change the world. And I'm going to call David Hirsch right away to get us help. I hope that's
Thank
okay.
you, Jim. Yep, thank you. Clayton, back to you. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we wrap up?
I mean, nothing jumps to mind. I mean, I think when you think about creating a sense of belonging, what we're really after at Angel City Sports is improving self-acceptance and self-confidence, so people can start to dream. And it seems silly, but if you're living with a physical disability in our country, due to the lack of awareness around adaptive and Paralympic sports, the odds are you have no idea all of these amazing sports and recreational activities exist for you. And so it is sort of like Jim and we're kind of showing people the impossible is possible. And I think that's a really interesting construct for everyone to get their head around. I mean, if somebody walked up to you and said, we can go to the moon tomorrow, you can just start to really dream about what your life could be like. And so that's where I get a lot of energy is, thinking, again, it seems counterintuitive because sports are accessible for all of us. Most of us can just walk down the street or backyard or the park or whatever, a pool, and do it, but this community can't. And so it really does, I think, unlock human potential and the ability to dream when you start to show them that things that were off limits or seemed impossible are indeed possible and entirely doable. And the stuff that Jim's working on is just so incredible. So I think that that's the exciting piece of what we do, because it's not really about the sport.
Thank you, Clayton. And if somebody wants to get involved or support the organization, volunteer, what's the best way about reaching out to you?
Yeah, I mean, we're really easy to find on the web and social media. Just Angel City Sports on social, and then angelcitysports.org on the web. And, we're easy to message or email or whatever. So, yeah, so super, super easy to find. I mean, we're all looking for followers. So, follow us on every social channel you can find us on.
Okay, thank you, Clayton. Jim, how about you? How could somebody volunteer or support what you're doing or get involved?
Yeah, the easy button is diveheart.org. We're launching COVID has allowed us the time to redevelop a new website, database, and update our training program. So diveheart.org is an easy button. And we're very blessed. I spent decades in the media business with the Tribune Company and WGN Radio and helped start up CLTV. And so when you click on media, there are hundreds of news stories that people can go, wow, that one resonates with me. I'm going to share that with my neighbor who is a child with cerebral palsy, or that one resonates with me because I have a friend who is a brother who's a veteran who's a triple amputee. What Clayton says is really true. It's like it's not on the radar. Scuba diving is not on the radar for people with disabilities. And when they do it, sometimes I don't care if they do it one time. If they do it once and they go, wow, if I can do this, I can do other things, and they take on other challenges, I've done my job, right?
Yeah. Thank you for sharing. we'll make sure that we include those in the show notes, so it'll make it as easy as possible for people to reach out to you. Just want to say thank you again to podcast ad number 4, Jim Elliot, and podcast ad number 7, Clayton Frech, for being our discussion leaders for this program. We do these bi-weekly. The next bi-weekly Dad Zoom call is going to be on September 15th, and the topic is adoption and special needs. So I'm hoping you could join us then as well. And the 501c3 that is putting this on is the 21st Century Dads Foundation, an all-volunteer organization, and we try to make sure that our content is free to all concerned, so we can certainly appreciate your support as well. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and I'm hoping to see you again at one of our future bi-weekly Zoom calls.